Hello everyone, this is a tutorial for Sid Meier's Civilization 5. This tutorial is going to be mostly talking about how to just generally do better at the game. It's not really meant for people who have never played the game. It's going to be more on how to improve what you already know. So, this first part I'm just going to be probably talking about the setup and the settings. So we're going to be playing as America. The reason is that they're fairly generic, so any strategy that works as America should work as any other civ. We'll talk about their bonuses in a second, what they actually get. We're playing on Pangea because Pangea tends to be one of the more balanced game modes, especially when you're playing with the AI, because the AI does terribly on water maps. So if you want to play a good game with the AI, you want to do it on a map that has a lot of land, otherwise they're just going to be total pushovers. Small map, normal difficulty, quick pace, and if we go to, you can click this little button here to go to advanced setup when you're making a game, and it lets you change what other civilizations you'll be playing as. We're just going to be doing random this time. You can set how many city-states are in the game, the map type, size, difficulty, all that stuff. You can actually start in another era. I tend to always start in the ancient era because it's just the way people usually play the game, to be honest, but you can start in later eras. World age, this is an interesting one. This basically, the older the world, the more flat land there would be. For example, if I did 3 billion years, then there would be a lot more hills and mountains and less flat land. I tend to like 5 billion years because having a lot of flat land, A, makes it easier for you to explore, B, it just... Again, it helps to kind of balance things out, so you don't end up having cities with ridiculous production and just tons and tons of hills. Temperature, rainfall, and sea level, these are all just kind of, again, kind of map settings. Temperature is just how hot it is. If you set it to hot, you'll get more desert jungle. Set it to cool, you'll get more tundra and snow. Rainfall, again, arid gets you more desert, wet gets you more marshes and jungles. I'm just going to leave those on the kind of default. Sea level, this basically is how big the continents are. I'm playing on low sea level just to kind of complement the Pangea because, again, the AI does terribly when there's a lot of water. So the less water there is, the more challenging it's going to be. But you can play with high and it'll make kind of more water, less land, essentially. Bigger oceans. Resources, we'll go through these. Sparse basically just means there are very few resources. And it's not... I tend not to play with that, like, ever. Standard is just normal resources. Abundant, they're everywhere. These two are the kind of more difficult ones. Legendary start basically means that, for the most part, it's going to be standard, like this one, except near your capital. Your capital, when you have legendary start on, your capital is always going to have a lot of resources right around it, it helps you make a good capital. Strategic balance is, again, it's the same as standard, except you're guaranteed to have iron, horses, and oil within 3 tiles of your capital. And that's what I'm going to be playing on, just to kind of... It's a good kind of balance thing, so that you don't have one person with iron, one person without iron. It just kind of helps to level the playing field. Here, you can disable multiple victory types. I've only disabled time victory, because it's... Yeah, I don't know. I don't like time victory. These are all the advanced options. I have policy saving and promotion saving on. That means that if you get a policy or a promotion on your units, you can save it. You don't have to get it immediately. You can actually save it and do it like later on. But apart from that, the rest of these are pretty much off, except quick combat and quick movement. That is just to make things go a little bit smoother. You can actually turn off barbarians, but I tend not to like to do that. So that is the game settings. Now, we're going to be playing as America. I'll just go down here. America starts with all land units have +1 side and 50% discount when purchasing tiles. What this means is that when you're scouting around early game, your units will have more sight, which means that they can see ruins before other civs, they can find city-states before other civs, and this is actually fairly useful late game when you're using things like artillery. You have a sight penalty, because it allows you to move your artillery into place and fire without the need for, like, a spotter unit. And it just makes them... It's not a really game-changing bonus, it's nothing really major, but it's kind of helpful in certain situations. The 50% discount when purchasing tiles is not really that useful unless you purchase a lot of tiles. It can be useful in the early game when you don't have very much money, but it tends not to be. I tend not to use it very much. And then you've got the Minuteman here. The Minuteman is a musketman that gets double movement in rough terrain, so it basically moves like a scout, but it's a musketman. And that's really good, because it allows you to kind of move around in the harsh terrain, take positions your enemy wouldn't be able to take, and it just generally gives you advantage. And not only that, they also get a bonus when fighting in rough terrain, so you can... Not only do they move through hills, forests, jungles faster, they also get a bonus when fighting in there. So Minutemen are quite good. They also get a bonus to, whenever they defeat an enemy unit, they give you points toward a Golden Age, except the amount of points they give you are so small that it's just not going to make a difference either way. You could kill hundreds of units with a Minuteman and still not get a Golden Age, so that's not really useful. And I think, in my opinion, the B-17 is probably the best part of America. It is a bomber that gets 2 promotions right off the start. It gets evasion, which means that it evades fighters, so it's harder to shoot down. I'm not sure if it works with anti-aircraft guns or not. It might. It also gets siege, which gives it a bonus against cities. So these things can absolutely destroy an enemy city. Not only are they harder to shoot down, but they do extra damage to enemy cities, and it's just a very useful late-game unit. The only problem with it is that it comes late enough in the game that by the time you get these, the game is more or less decided already. So, and I'll talk more about stuff like that when we actually get into the game. But I'm telling America because they're fairly generic. They don't get anything like too extreme. If I were to play as like someone like Venice, where are they? Here. If I were to play as Venice, then the strategies I use for Venice would be totally different from anyone else. So I wanted to use America because the strategies that I'm going to be talking about are fairly general strategies. I'm not going to be going into anything too specific. I'm just going to be saying, in general, this is what you should do in certain situations. And again, just because I say you should do it, doesn't mean you have to. Everything's situational. So, and I'll talk more about that when we actually get into the game. So I think that is pretty much everything in terms of our start settings. So we can just start the game here, and we'll see what kind of starting area we get.
Welcome, President Washington. You lead the industrious American civilization. Formed in the conflagration of revolution in the 18th century, within 100 years the young nation became embroiled in a terrible civil war that nearly tore the country apart. But it was just a few short years later, in the 20th century, that the United States reached the height of its power, emerging triumphant and mighty from the 2 terrible wars that destroyed so many other great nations. The United...
Alright. So here we are on turn 0. And this bears mentioning, if you are playing multiplayer, now this guide is supposed to give you tips for multiplayer and single player, so the things I'm going to be talking about can work in either scenario. So if you are playing multiplayer, the first turn, turn 0, if you have the turn timer on, the first turn will be, you won't have a time limit. You have an infinite amount of time on this first turn to kind of decide what you're doing. And that's useful to keep in mind, so you don't really have to rush this first turn. Now, if you hit Y, these little yield icons pop up, and this is especially useful when you're settling your capital. Because basically what you want to do is you want to have at least 1 tile with 2 food within 1 tile of your capital, so you can work it immediately and get the growth bonus. This area looks fairly good. It's got lots of plains. It's by a river. Rivers are good because after you get civil service, you get a growth bonus to farms built along rivers. So you want to... Also, you can build a watermill, a garden, and a hydro plant, all of which are very good buildings. So I'm probably going to want to stay along the river. We have 2 unique luxuries here, ivory and wine. They're not particularly useful, actually, because they don't have very good tile yields. They mostly give you gold. If this was something like salt, then it would be a lot better, but we do have 2 wheat. 2 wheat is actually fairly good, and plains are good by themselves. Decent amount of forest, so we could conceivably like chop them down maybe to make a wonder. So I'm thinking that I might want to settle on this hill, and the reason is that the base tile your city creates gives you +2 food. So if I settle here, the base tile is worked automatically. You don't have to assign a citizen to it. So if I were to settle here, it would get 2 food, 1 production. If I settle here, it's 2 food, 2 production. And that 1 extra production is actually fairly useful. So settling on a hill is always good. It also gives you a defensive bonus. Cities on hills are much harder to attack and take. So obviously settling on the hill would be good here. But really, the main problem with settling on this hill would be that I miss any potential resources that are up this way. So I'm actually going to take this warrior and I'm going to move him here to see what I will be missing by moving away. Now, it bears mentioning that your city can work anything within 3 tiles. So if I were to settle on this hill, I would still be able to work this wheat. So that doesn't really matter. I would lose this wine, but I already have a wine. So that doesn't really matter. I'm thinking that that hill sounds pretty good, so I'm going to settle there. Now before I settle again, I'm just going to take this guy and move him here. Discover some ruins. Ruins are always good, they give you early game kind of bonuses. And then I'm probably going to move here. When you're scouting, you always want to try to end your turn on a hill. The reason is when you're on a hill, you get extra sight. You see, I could see all the way over here, whereas when I was here, the furthest I could see was this tile. So you always want to end your turn on a hill if you can when you're scouting, because that's always... It gives you more sight, allows you to explore faster, and the faster you explore it, the more ruins you'll find, the more city-states you'll meet, and it just helps you just get things set up a little bit better. So now, we founded our capital. What do we do first? Well, there's a little tip you can kind of do here. And this kind of... It kind of takes advantage of the way the city growth works. So if you set your city to production focus, and I lock on the 2 food tile, see, the city will grow in 5 turns, because I'm still getting the food. Now the thing is, when your city grows, the additional population that your city gets is automatically assigned to a tile. In our case, it will be this tile, because it has the highest production. And when that happens, the tile yields of the tile it gets assigned to are added to whatever you get that turn, except for, well, they're not added, actually, except for production. So, for example, if this city grew to this tile, and it gave 2 food, 1 production, the turn that it grew, it would give the 1 production, but not the 2 food, and then the turn after that, it would start giving the full yields. What that means is that if you set it to production focus, when your city grows, it will automatically work the highest production tile, which will give you a bonus production because you get that tile yield immediately. And then the next turn, you can reassign that citizen to a food tile if you want to grow, or leave him on the production tile if you don't have enough happiness to actually grow. And this is fairly useful because it gives you, again, bonus production early on. The only downside is that you kind of have to pay attention to when your cities grow, otherwise you kind of miss out on things. You end up leaving your guys locked on production tiles rather than food tiles, and it can be kind of... You just have to pay attention. So if you don't like paying attention, you don't like micromanaging, this probably isn't the best thing for you to do. So what should we build first? Now, our advisor wants us to build a monument, and it's worth mentioning at this point that you should never listen to your advisors. The advisors essentially function as the AI, and the AI is almost always making the wrong decision. So if you see one of these, just ignore it. It's not there. Now, why would we build a monument? Well, it would give us 2 culture. 2 culture would help us get our social policy, but we're going to get one anyway in 15 turns. There's no real need to build a monument. So I'm actually going to start with a scout. We could build a worker first, but again, there are going to be barbarians around, and without any units nearby, because we're going to send this warrior away, barbarians will be able to just come in and snatch our worker. Not to mention that the worker isn't actually... We don't have the text to improve a lot of these tiles, so building a worker at this point isn't actually going to do us that much good. So I'm going to pop a scout on. Now for our first research, unless you're playing a civ like Ethiopia, or the Celts, who have... or the Mayans. Well, no, never mind. The Ethiopia or the Celts, who have a bonus to founding a religion early and getting lots of early faith. You're almost always going to want to go pottery because that gets you the shrine. The granary is less important, but the shrine is extremely, extremely important to get as soon as possible. Because the sooner you get it, the faster you get a religion. The faster you get a religion, the more time you have to spread your religion before other religions get founded. So you always want to. I would almost always go pottery first because getting that early shrine up is that important. So, got some gold from that rune. That's not actually that useful at this point, although we could buy the wheat. We don't have the citizen to work it though, so there's no point. Now, when you're scouting around early on, what you're really looking out for are sites for new cities. And I'm thinking that this area up here looks quite nice. It's by a river. It's got cattle, which are 3 food tile. It's got jungle, which would be good for science after we get universities. And it's got spices here. We don't have spices on our capital. And the spices they're a unique luxury that we don't have. And that's always something you want when settling a new city, if you can get it. Because when you settle a city, it takes 4 happiness to settle that initial city. A luxury resource gives you 4 happiness. So settling a city near a luxury resource you don't have kind of offsets the happiness you lose from founding that city. And that's extremely important to keep in mind when you're expanding. Alright, so the scout will be done next turn. We'll probably send him south. Generally, when you're scouting with your warrior, you want to city-state. When you're scouting with your warrior, you want to send him along open tiles so that he can move faster. But scouts, they get extra movement. Well, they don't actually. They ignore terrain costs, so I can send them over these hills without any kind of problem. So there's more ruins here and more ruins here. There are a lot of hills here. That means our capital is going to have a lot of production when we build mines and all of these. It also means that more than likely there are going to be some kind of resources like iron, possibly in these hills, or possibly in these hills, because we are guaranteed iron somewhere around our capital. And that's a good thing to keep in mind. Now, I'm thinking that we just build another scout. Because, again, we don't really need a monument, because we're going to get 12 turns of policy anyway. We don't have the text to really do anything useful with the worker. And warriors are just not that great. They're not really worth building. So I'm actually going to go with the scout. Again. Because, again, the faster you scout, the more ruins you get, and the further ahead you can get in the early game. So this scout actually became an archer, which is fairly useful. It'll help us fight barbarians. And we have met our first other player, the first AI here. It looks like they're going to try to get this rune, but luckily I'm going to get it first. And that actually gave us animal husbandry, which is fairly useful. And this is a time where I'm actually going to buy this tile. Now normally this would cost 30 gold, but I get a discount because I'm in America. So I'm going to buy that tile, and I'm going to work that tile. Generally speaking, you want to grow to size 3 as soon as possible. And then you kind of want to settle down, you want to start building other things. So getting to size 3 is the priority at the moment. And really what you want to do is you want to find city locations. And the earliest places you want to settle cities are places that are contested. For example, I can see that the Songhai are here. Let's say I found a good city spot right over here. In fact, this doesn't look too bad. I would prioritize settling here over settling here, even if this was a better spot, simply because he might settle here, and if he settles here, I won't settle here. So the sooner I settle here, the faster I'll get this stuff. If this area is not contested, then there's no rush to settle here. So that's something to keep in mind. I'm probably going to send, when I build my first settler, I'm probably going to send him somewhere in this area to prevent Songhai from taking this place. And again, that will kind of block them. You generally, if you have another civ nearby, you want to place a city in between them and your capital. Because otherwise they'll be able to just march straight to your capital, and that would be bad. So you want to have a city to block them, essentially. Alright, so what do we build now? Now, 3 scouts I think would be a little bit overkill. I'm considering actually building a monument now. In fact, I think that's what I'm going to do. Because it will speed up the policy. Usually you find a ruin that will give you culture, and then you don't really need a monument. But in our case, I think it would be just fine to build a monument. Alright, so we've discovered pottery, we found some more ruins and a barbarian encampment, so that's all found. It looks like there's another city-state up here, and a little bit of desert, which is great. I'm probably going to try to explore his lands a little bit to see, just to kind of look and see what he has. Now, normally at this point, I would research animal husbandry next to reveal the horses, because the horses will give, whatever tile they spawn on, they will give +1 production. And if you're guaranteed to get horses, that +1 production is fairly useful, because you're guaranteed to get it. But we got animal husbandry from a ruin. So what do we do next? Well, I think at this point, it's good to look at what luxury resources you have. So in our case, we have iron, and we have ivory. Ivory is improved with a camp, which takes trapping, while wine is produced with calendar, or with a plantation, which is calendar. So it's probably worth, if you click that button, it'll take you to the technology tree here, and you can kind of queue up the researchers by clicking on one and then holding shift and clicking another. So we're going to go for calendar and then trapping. And that will allow us to hook up these two luxuries and give us the extra happiness we need at the beginning to settle our second city. So that will be fairly useful. Alright, now I'm going to actually cut the video here. See you next time for the next episode. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, and thank you for watching.